What if a single word in the Bible was never meant to be there?
What if that one mistranslation shaped how entire cultures understand love, faith, and identity?
That mistranslation happened in 1946, and for decades it has been repeated, defended, and weaponized.
Now we're tracing how that moment continues to echo across churches, classrooms, and countries. We're exploring how misinformation about Scripture spreads and how critical thinking, education, and honest dialogue can help us see the bigger picture.
This is the 1946 Culture Shift Tour, UK, a journey through language, belief, and the stories that shape us. In this episode of the 1946 Culture Shift Tour, UK, we're centering faith, survival, and the global realities facing LGBTQIA+ people.
We're joined by Reverend Jide Macaulay, an Anglican priest, global LGBTQ+ advocate, and the founder of House of Rainbow, an organization supporting LGBTQ+ people of faith across more than 22 countries.
Jide first appeared in 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted Culture, but today we go deeper into his life, his ministry, and the work he is doing with communities facing persecution, displacement, and exile.
This is a conversation about courage, reconciliation, and the cost of faith when belief becomes a matter of safety and survival.
If you want to understand what faith looks like beyond borders and what solidarity means when lives are on the line, this conversation is for you. Reverend Jide, it is so amazing to have you on our podcast today. I know for any of our listeners who probably recognize you from the 1946 film, the first time we got to meet was during a meeting where we were expanding how we can work together to get this important research and the work that you do, how we can work together. And so you made an appearance in the 1946 film, which I'm so grateful for. For any of our audience members who might not be familiar with you, would you mind just going through who you are, where you're from, a little bit about your background?
Thank you so much. Honestly, I think 1946 movie has become one of my passion as well, because of what it means, to LGBT Christians around the world, and especially in Africa, needless to say. My name is Jide Macaulay. I was born in London, raised in Nigeria. I am the founder and CEO of House of Rainbow. House of Rainbow is an LGBT Christian community that is supporting the LGBT people on the journey of reconciling faith and sexuality. I will share more about how we got to that point. And also, I've had a steep of journey with a number of other denominations. But of course, the journey about sexuality and theology has been a great part of that journey. And we're currently serving our communities in the UK and in Africa, working with several other platforms as well. And I'm grateful to be here with you in this moment.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jide, for that wonderful introduction. So, continuing on a little bit about yourself, can you share with us about growing up in Nigeria, how your faith shaped you, and when you realized your sexuality faith would collide?
I was born in London, like I said. I was in Nigeria probably before my third birthday. So my parents emigrated back to Nigeria, or rather moved back to Nigeria, where they have come from, and when they studied in the UK. Now, of course, growing up in Nigeria was like any other person, working class family, or maybe my parents were trying to achieve middle class. I don't even know. But I think what is more important is the environment in which I lived in. I lived in an environment that is very Christian and conservative. My dad is also a minister of the gospel in Nigeria. I think it's something that he picked up much later, because he started his life and his career as an automobile engineer. He was an automobile engineer, and then, of course, he was very well known in Nigeria. My dad is a treasure of Nigeria because he brought engineering to Nigeria when it wasn't well known. Let's put it that way. At least his own expertise in engineering. So I was raised in a very popular family, the Macaulay family. And as you know, we had our own currency until the money was devalued. So if anyone is listening today, I am a direct descendant of Herbert Macaulay, a nationalist leader who actually, fought, for the independence of Nigeria. Unfortunately, history tells us that he actually died before Nigeria gained independence.
Well, that's such an interesting story. I didn't even know that about you, Reverend Jide. See, we learn something new about you every time we.
Thank you so much.
Totally, totally. But you 2 have a past as well besides the 1946 project. Y'all have worked together in the UK, or at least through Kaleidoscope or some other organizations, right?
Yeah, yep, yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I pass off cross definitely. I want for about 8 years or so, I was a trustee of Kaleidoscope Trust. Obviously, that is looking at the impact of colonial laws within the Commonwealth countries, and of course, also supporting nations like Botswana, Belize, and Nigeria, and so on, even Jamaica, on the pathway to decriminalize homosexuality. So, one of the first task that we had to deal with in Nigeria at the early stage of House of Rainbow was actually attending a number of public debates that involved the anti-gay laws that were both in federal law and in state laws in Nigeria. It certainly impacted on our community. One of the things that we struggle with in Nigeria is the fact that there are colonial laws that criminalize same-sex behavior. I mean, things like carnal knowledge against the order of nature is criminalized, but honestly, it is actually rarely used in that sense. And of course, in 2014, the Nigerian government successfully passed a law on same-sex marriage prohibition. Same-sex marriage is the key word. But of course, LGBT Nigerians are struggling because of jungle justice. So literally, there is no active law that criminalizes somebody around their identity. But we live in a society that social justice and jungle justice is actually the dangerous rhetorics in the country as we speak. So, and that really, really sets many people apart. Otherwise, we cannot congregate. But the irony is that there are organizations in Nigeria in which the entry point to support the LGBT communities either through sexual health or human rights, but not clearly saying we are a gay community. Do you understand me? All of those things are almost or nearly criminalized under the law. So we cannot assemble, we cannot gather. But I think that, there are a group of lawyers in Nigeria today, especially with Minority Watch, that are, beginning to share more information and clarity about the place of LGBT people in Nigeria.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
And so just to say, Reverend Jide, a lot of that you've mentioned some great organizations such as Kaleidoscope Trust. There's also African Rainbow, there's Micro Rainbow, there's UK Black Pride, which is obviously where we always end up meeting, and just all these amazing spaces that have formed because of activists and amazing people like yourself or advocates like myself that are out there really pushing the boundaries around colonial laws that have plagued our continent for such a very long time. But obviously us trying to push that barrier and push back on no longer support or never ever support you should never have supported in the first place. So I want to talk a bit about your faith, your calling, and staying in this space. What led you to pursue the ministry as a gay man? And what kept you rooted in faith when it became difficult?
Seriously, what kept me? Let's start. I was raised in a Christian home, so the principles of my upbringing has always been founded on Christianity, love, and justice. But of course, I recognize how conservative my Christian upbringing was when I started to hear more about the rhetorics and the teachings from my father's ministry that was extremely condemning. Now, I've always known that I'm gay from maybe about 4 or 5 years old. And of course, by the time I got to 13, 14 years old, I was baptized. In Nigeria, in most African countries, teenagers are baptized. We're not baptized as babies, maybe the Anglican church still do that. But I think that the reality is that, following my baptism as a pastor's child, I was very familiar with scriptures, reading the Bible. So it wasn't too long by the time I got to passages like Leviticus 20:13 that clearly says that if a man has sex with another man, it is an abomination and they shall be put to death. Now, in imagine what will go through the mind of a 13-year-old who is having those thoughts. Now, we can fast forward to today. We know that those texts are taken out of context when they're being used to vilify, to humiliate gay men or lesbian women. But I think that my upbringing actually set me up for the gospel. It also puts me in harm's way, so to say. Following my baptism, and I've read the Bible and I'm struggling with it. It took me a few more years for me to tackle that, to the point that I also went through a time where I was praying away my sexuality. I was praying away my gayness. I didn't want to be gay. And of course, following that stint of 40 days of praying and fasting, I met a lovely girl in my local church. I asked her to be my girlfriend. Naively, I celebrated that I have a girlfriend, I'm no longer gay. How naive and how silly that could be when I look back today. Not a day after I met her did my feelings change towards men, but I controlled it. I managed it. What I say to people is that I can control my sexual behaviors towards men, but I cannot change my sexual orientation. That is something that is beyond anyone's doing. Before I get to what kept me, I went through a lot of challenges. The church in which I grew up and very accustomed to in London, when I eventually came out to my ex-wife, because we had a 7-year relationship, of which the last 3 years of this relationship, we were married and we had a child together. So when I was going through my own breakdown and heartache and emotional turmoil, Josami, I actually sat my ex-wife, down and said, look, we got to talk about what's troubling me. I am a gay man. In her own words, she said, I cannot compete with this. Those were exactly her words. And she was right. I was almost swore in that second. She was right. And of course, when the story got to the church, I was excommunicated from the church. I was subjected to inhumane treatment. You understand me? And I couldn't believe that this is a church community that I served as a young and upcoming leader. So I left the church for about 2 years, obviously post my separation and divorce from my ex-wife. Then I consciously seek out another church to go. And the reality is that I just wanted to worship God. I wanted to go to church. I wanted a church community. When I joined this new church in London, now this is a very much Pentecostal, charismatic church. I love the environment. I love the church. But the irony is that I couldn't run away from myself, even going to church. Because on my first day in that church, the usher at the entrance was a gay man who later became a good friend of mine. So you can imagine that, we can run from all of who we are, but we cannot hide from God, even in church. It took me another 4 years in this community before they found out that I was a gay man. And of course, on this particular occasion, I submitted myself to the church authorities because for healing, for conversion therapy. And it took a period of about 6 weeks to 8 weeks. It got tougher by the day. It got tougher because of the abuse and the oppression I was facing in that moment. I submitted myself. I begged them. I cried, please help me. I don't want to be gay. But at the end of it all, the abuse and the conversion therapy did not work. I walked away a broken person needing healing. Now, it took me another 2 years away from church because I just refused to engage with church. But I haven't actually lost my relationship with God. I kept my relationship with God because I'm asking questions. Around about 2001, 2002, I was introduced to the Metropolitan Community Church in North London. And this was the beginning of the changes in my life. Let me go back, to 1996, 98. For 2 years, I was training, in preparedness for ministry at my father's theological college. So those 2 years were very tough because I didn't actually get the opportunity to talk to my dad about my divorce from my ex-wife, the reasons behind it. So we kind of like just went along, and then I was ordained in September of 98 as a minister. I was asking myself, what do I do with this? So it took me nearly another 5 years to overcome that situation when I finally joined the Metropolitan Community Church. And it was at this point that I started to do a lot of healing. I took the time to unlearn, to relearn so many things in my own life journey. The Metropolitan Community Church was it wasn't plain sailing, but it literally changed the trajectory of my life. It brought me to a place that is sane, that was joyful, that was happy. And when my dad, who is a religious leader, found out that I had joined the Metropolitan Community Church, he told my family that I've joined a cult, that they should go to that church of the devil, that Jide has joined the demonic church. And that was painful enough. But I mean, I went along, I did a lot of training. You know, my placement was in London. And then I then got a scholarship to go to the US, where I studied inclusive and queer theology at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. And following that, it was summer of 2005. I was part of the ordination party that, you know, was ordained at the MCC conference in Calgary, Canada. What a journey to achieve all of this. When they asked me, Jide, what do you want to do following your ordination? I said, I want to return to Nigeria, you know, to start the MCC church that we called House of Rainbow. And that was it. There was no going back. And of course, you know, I mean, the MCC church being known for this, its human rights church, its inclusive church, actually set me up for that, which I am truly grateful to the denomination today.
Wow.
Wow. All right. Josie and I think probably both feel the same thing right now. That's an
Mm.
incredible story, right, Josie? I'm sure you're feeling the same thing. Um,
Bravery, all of those.
I
Thank you
mean,
so
you heard
much.
the
Thank
call and
you.
you never turned it off.
No,
No.
not at all. I mean, I think that, you know, that journey continued. And I think that what kept me was God. What kept me were people like Reverend Jide Perry. When I listened to his story, it's almost as if I saw my story in him. He was married. He came out as gay. I mean, he had family. So did I. Do you understand me? What also kept me is people like Harvey Milk. When you hear the story of someone that is fighting publicly and openly, I mean, that took me on a journey as well. Because the work in Nigeria was not limited to creating just a congregational safe space. It also meant that we were out in the Nigerian parliament, whether it's in Lagos or in Abuja, talking to parliamentarians about the anti-gay bill does not reflect in Christian teaching. This is an abuse. This is harmful and legislation against an already marginalized community. And we're seeing the impact of these dangerous bills today.
Well, going to the learning about the Church of Nigeria, which is something that I'm definitely not familiar with, and I know our American audience, I'm sure, isn't. We're just learning on this podcast about the Church of England. It seems like you're ordained in both, right? You were able to get ordained in the Church of England, but then were you able to go and pass through under your father during that time as well?
I need to clarify this also for the listeners as well. I was never ordained a priest in the Church of Nigeria. My ordination was at my father's ministry, which is a non-denominational organization, United Bible University and Soul Winners. My second ordination was with the Metropolitan Community Church. You know, my current ordination is with the Church of England. But of course, you know, once House of Rainbow was in Nigeria, we had an interaction, well, maybe not interaction. We actually create chaos, especially with the Church of Nigeria. They were down our throat. I mean, House of Rainbow was a small congregation, but it seems that creating a space, safe space for the LGBT Christians was a problem for the Church of Nigeria. I, at that point, had not even considered that I would become an Anglican. Do you understand me? The journey towards Anglican ministry was much later in my journey. Actually, much later. It's now 15 years now since I joined the leadership of the Church of England. But I think that the reality is that at the point where House of Rainbow was in Nigeria, where I had no connection with the Anglican Church in Nigeria, but I do have Anglican friends and colleagues who are also part of my mentors as well. But I think that the difference between the two denomination or communion, so to say, is that the Nigerian church is still far removed from anything inclusive. First of all, they don't have women priests. Do you understand me? Of
Yeah.
course, you know, they have a lot. They had a lot influence on politics in Nigeria, like maybe the Church of England also have a lot of influence on politics here in the UK. Now, of course, the Church of Nigeria does not accept, you know, LGBT people at all. So they will not ordain anyone that is they know to be a gay priest. So they will not ordain you. You will definitely be disqualified in that moment. But of course, the Church of England, will ordain gay priests. But I think that the irony is that gay priests in the Church of England, currently cannot marry even under the law of England that provides provision for marriage. I've had my own contention with both. Even though I was not part of the Church of Nigeria, I've been very outspoken, about the harmful religion and theology that's been pushed by the Church of Nigeria. I remember the first time I spoke out against the Church of Nigeria was actually 2003. It was following the introduction of same-sex marriage in the UK, or civil partnership. I remember you doing a response, in a program where I spoke out against the Church of Nigeria because someone said that there are no homosexuals in Nigeria. And I say, hey, I'm Nigerian and I'm gay, so I'm sure I will be counted amongst many others that I know. And I think that, the Church of England, in 2019, I spearheaded a documentary on BBC Primetime, which is titled, Am I Too Gay for God? And of course, that particular documentary in 2019 was to ask very clear question from the archbishops and the authorities in the Church of England. Why is it that the Church of England is able to get a legal provision to discriminate against same-sex marriage for gay people? And unfortunately, as a priest in the Church of England, I cannot even marry under the legal provisions of the law. I will be dismissed and my ordination will be removed.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Jide. I also wanted to ask about safety as well within Nigeria, your safety being out. Can you talk a little bit about that, and for the audience as well, to understand like the dangers that you were under with House of Rainbow and the church in Nigeria?
To be quite honest, I lived in a relative comfort in England before the consideration to relocate to Nigeria. But the one thing I also want people to understand is that I grew up in Nigeria. So I was probably one of several Nigerian population that is often sheltered. So I didn't think that I'll consider myself streetwise in Nigeria. So navigating certain areas might not be the thing that I do best. When I moved to Nigeria in 2006, it was actually my intention, to relocate on a permanent basis. It wasn't temporary. But unfortunately, because of my visibility and my connection as a Christian, it made me an immediate target. Because to be quite honest, if I was a chef or even if I was a pilot and I was gay, nobody cares, But the moment you say you're a pastor and you're gay, that is literally a target on your back. So it wasn't too long. Within the space of 2 years that we were in Nigeria, the attack began almost 6 months in.
Wow.
I think that the first media coverage was in Wall Street Journal in February of 2007. I pick up, the title says Anti-Gay Bill Divides Family, because the journalist had actually interviewed both myself and my dad, so I was referred to as Reverend Macaulay Jr. and Reverend Macaulay Sr. We're actually on opposite sides, especially around the anti-gay bill. The article was incredible, but that was one of the starting point of my popularity in Nigeria. And of course, back in the mid-2000s, we had blogs. We didn't have social media as we have today. But news traveled very far, from New York to Lagos and across the country. Before you know it, I was a subject of different media channels and radio talks and things like that. And of course, there was a lot of bounty on my head, death threats and things like that. And unfortunately, by the end of 2008, my home was vandalized. And if I was in that house, I would have been killed. There's no question about it. And several times as well, I've been attacked physically in Nigeria. And one occasion, I was even attacked at the airport where someone felt that they didn't like what I stood for. But of course, at the end of 2008, I was forced to leave the country because by this time we got a lot of threats against the congregation. And the major threat was that they will massacre the congregation in cold blood. I could not, in good conscience, allow the congregation to continue to meet when there is such threat. And we're not getting support or protection from the Nigerian police. So that to me creates a lot of challenges. It's not only in Nigeria, there's a lot of abuse on social media. Cyberbullying is terrible. Sometimes you make a post, you just need to read the comment and see how abusive people are. And there are times where people have even taken out some social media platform with a headline, "We want donation for Jide Macaulay's funeral is a fake pastor and all of those things. There weren't a lot of people out there that were looking to attack me. But to be quite honest, I think what kept me is that God loved me just the way I am. And I think at this point I can say that being gay for me means God adores you, God accepts you, God anoints you, God affirms you, God accompanies you. And people just need to know that standing for all of who you are is not always easy, but knowing that God loves you is just amazing.
It's
Thank you,
incredible.
Reverend Jide. That's amazing, and also what a beautiful way to sort of move on to talk about some of the amazing stuff that House of Rainbow has done and achieved since you set it up. So I wondered if we could move into the next topic here and talk about what is House of Rainbow and why did you feel to call it that when you started it?
I mean, I love this question every time it comes up. I didn't think that we actually set out to call it House of Rainbow. People thought we were actually a housing association at one point. So, and I think, well, why not? It's like you start building properties. But I mean, House of Rainbow started with a conversation because when I went through my formation with the metropolitan community churches, I started to think, and looking at my own journey as well, I started to think, where can gay people go to and be able to worship God and praise God and celebrate God without the discrimination? And even with my journey at the MCC in London, I still had questions because, as many people know, certain communities in London can also be very white. So when I went to the MCC church, I was relatively the only black person that kept showing up. And it wasn't surprising that I took on the responsibility for associate pastor for African ministries right in London. So I had the responsibility of going to the black queer community to let them know about the MCC church and bring them to church. I mean, I did achieve that to some extent. House of Rainbow came by because of several conversations about reconciling faith and sexuality, my own personal journey, and and my experiences with conversion therapy, and attempt to deliver me from the spirit of homosexuality. And I remember this is also the early days of the internet. It's crazy, isn't it? I don't know if anyone listening to this program will remember Yahoo groups. And Yahoo group was like Facebook of today. So we formed a group. I formed a group on Yahoo group, and we called it African Gay Christian. And of course, we had about 218 people join. That's like about 10,000 people on Facebook today. So just try and imagine. But the conversation was very interactive, and I think somebody raised a question that wouldn't it be nice to have a house where the people of Rainbow can go to? And that was it. We say, well, we call it House of Rainbow. So there's no dashing lights. It's just people having this conversation and realizing that we can actually start something. And once we have the name, I think the next stage for me at the end of my training with the MCC church was the end of 2005. So I was aiming for January of 2006 to relocate to Nigeria. But of course, I keep my eyes open. I keep my ears on the ground as well. We heard that the Nigerian government was going to make a New Year statement and gifting the Nigerian population the anti-gay bill in a New Year statement by the president. It was heartbreaking. So in January, the Nigerian government introduced the anti-gay bill to criminalize the LGBT community. And that meant that my transition to Nigeria was delayed by about 8 months. I used the time to investigate, spoke to my colleagues in Nigeria. I met with other gay activists from Nigeria just to get a sense of what's going on in Nigeria. But of course, also the MCC was very supportive because I remember the first Sunday in July, we had an international day of prayer for Nigeria, for the LGBT community. And that was profound. It was across the whole MCC churches, where they're able to hold us in prayer. So in August of 2006, I got on the aeroplane with my worldly luggages and everything behind me, and I moved to Nigeria. So it took me a couple of months to settle in, but on the 2nd of September, we had our first service in Nigeria with 32 people. So the House of Rainbow was birthed in Nigeria, and of course the work continues today.
And then now it's in over 20 countries. It's spread much like the MCC church. It's getting around. How many members would you say is there still kind of a chat group that goes on? What are some of the services, I guess, that House of Rainbow supplies for all of the different countries now?
Thank you so much. I mean, I think the one thing I'll say, just for clarification, is that, yeah, we have footprint in 22 countries.
Wow.
And we work with local communities, local LGBT communities. And a good example is that between 2015 and 2019, just before the pandemic, we were very active in Southern Africa. So we're talking about countries like South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho. We went as far as Zimbabwe as well. But we also have a House of Rainbow ministry in Kinshasa, DRC. And we also have House of Rainbow registered in Accra, Ghana. So I think that the fact that we can do this also means that we are providing an opportunity and safe spaces for LGBT people in Africa, especially. And I think that's very important. The services that we provide at the moment, we have an online service, which is every Sunday morning. We use the Clubhouse app. So if anybody's looking for House of Rainbow, if you go to Clubhouse app, you can actually join a service. It's 7 a.m. UK time. I know it sounds really early. All you need to do is roll out of bed and join the service online. We do get a lot of people from many countries around the world, and mostly African countries, because some countries are like 2-3 hours ahead of us, so they're able to join us in good time. Now, the other service in London, we just increased it from a monthly service to twice a month this year because the capacity is increasing. We had our first service last Sunday. There was nearly 40 people in person, and we believe that number will continue to grow as we go through the year. In the last few months, we did an exercise to register our members. We are currently close to 350 members, and these are the ones, about 60 to 70% are in the UK. And we probably recognize the other 30-40% are outside of the UK. But these are people that are accessing our programs. Let me put it in quick terms. House of Rainbow have 5 thematic areas. The first one is our fellowship. We're creating safe space for fellowship, and it could expand across the UK because we're thinking about having fellowships in Manchester, in Birmingham, but this requires a lot of resources as well.
Mm.
The second area of our ministry is that we're supporting LGBT people that are fleeing persecution, survivors of human trafficking, and those that are caught up in labor or sexual exploitation. I mean, when do you hear a church that is so involved in protecting their own people? So this is one area of ministry that we do. So if people have fled their own country, whether it's Uganda, Malawi, or Nigeria, and part of their story includes, religious persecution, we are here for you. Even if there's no religious persecution, we want to hear your story and be able to support you. The third area of ministry is ministry to people living with HIV. I'm a person living with HIV. January this year, 2026, is my 23rd year post my diagnosis. I have done the work, and I want to be able to use this ministry to support other Black, gay, bisexual, and transgender men who are struggling with living with HIV. We just make sure that there's a safe space that they can come to and be themselves. Number 4 is our global ministry. Obviously, that involves the work that we did in 2015, 2019, and we continue to do. When I travel abroad to Kenya, South Africa, I continue the work as well. We are building resources, print resources, media resources that we can share with people. One of the resources that I've developed recently is what I'm calling Kweli Sanctified Truth. This is a message that I share every Sunday. It's about 15 to 20 minutes. And, I want people to hear a sermon, a message that is directed at the LGBT community as opposed to messages against them. Because, we've had too much of harmful messages, harmful theology. And I'm hoping that, both queer theologians and our allies will take time to preach a message that actually celebrates and lift up the LGBT persons. And finally, our mission is about pride and conferences. Sammy, I think this organization, we do a lot of pride. One of our flagship intervention at Pride is the inclusive interfaith chaplaincy. Not only do we bring Christians together, we bring people of other faith together that are inclusive and affirming. And that is very important. Rarely will you hear about a Christian church that is very much involved in supporting other faith communities. But House of Rainbow, we do so because we believe so.
We definitely saw that firsthand at UK Black Pride. It was amazing to see, and I love seeing interfaith communities and people supporting one another. And then everything else that you mentioned, House of Rainbow, all of the amazing work that you all do there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. And I mean, the reality is that towards the end of last year, we had one of our meetings with the leaders that manage the fellowship, and I was telling them about all the different other areas, and House of Rainbow have over 30 active volunteers that are helping to manage it. So we're talking about our digital presence and our media. We're talking about all the different areas, people seeking asylum, the HIV ministry and the fellowship, the internet. We have different people that are supporting the work. But I think that we're trusting God for the other resources that we need, because there's no doubt that, the work also requires active funding as well.
Reverend Jide, I mean, you've covered such a lot there and some amazing stuff that's happening on the ground. You spoke a bit about your journey transitioning between the UK and Africa. You also spoke a little bit about the work that you do with refugees and people with HIV, your own visibility, some amazing things that you've done there. And I mean, you've covered incredible things, really. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about, what does your work with refugees look like on the ground right now? And in terms of like support and stuff like that, what is it that you would encourage people to do? Because we see the rhetoric and stuff going on around foreigners, immigration, and so on. So would you just give the audience a bit of insight around that?
Absolutely. Now, the work we do with refugees are very, very important. And I think that for House of Rainbow, we started to look at the impact of conversion therapy. We're looking at the impact of healing and deliverance, that people have been subjected to. Some of the things that I have experienced myself. So when people come to us and they tell us that, that their parents have forced them to go to some prophet, to lay hands on them, and it was extremely abusive. These are stories that we hear almost all the time at House of Rainbow. Now, of course, the immigration authorities in the UK also do not understand conversion therapy and the abuse, the impact on people's mental health and well-being. So this is where we provide a supporting letter to explain the situation for the candidate, for the applicant, to understand that we hear you, we understand you, we take you through a journey, of healing and reconciliation. That is part of that we do. The process for us requires us to write a supporting letter, for the individual if they're facing for the application to the Home Office in the UK. We've also supported people across Europe as well. We've supported refugees in America and in Canada. One of the things is that we cannot support people in Africa. The reason is because it might be considered human trafficking. Because, I mean, if we're telling people how to seek asylum in the UK, it doesn't make sense. You've got to be in the UK for you to be able to access those services. But of course, it's mindful for people to know what the challenges are whilst they're at home, so that when they get into Europe or North America, they're able to articulate their stories, or they can come to us and we can help them successfully explain the impact on themselves. But I don't think that there's anywhere that anyone can get a visa based on the persecution as an LGBT person. I think that is something that we need to be very clear about. When people arrive in Europe or in America and they make a decision with a good advice to seek asylum, then they should do so. And if you are a member or part of the House of Rainbow community, we will listen to you and we will advise you on what to do or not to do. Let me add to that. I think that the impact of people fleeing from Africa to Europe is also as a result of the sodomy laws. Let's be very clear of that. So going back to Nigeria, for example, the average gay person cannot stand up for their rights simply because they don't know what the law says. And they are in a very hostile and harmful environment. They cannot stand up for themselves. And unfortunately, we are seeing an increase in attacks, harmful abuses, when people are being kidnapped, being extorted, being blackmailed just because they are gay. Is very wrong. And unfortunately, the police and the authorities in Nigeria are not saying a crime has been committed, but where is the crime against somebody saying I'm gay? You understand me? There's nothing in it. I think the law in Nigeria that can be used says canon knowledge against the order of nature, and you certainly need witnesses to prove that. under the law. The most recent law, the 2014 Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act, is even clear in its title, is same-sex marriage. Nigeria is on a knee-jerk reaction when the UK, had same-sex marriage laws. So Nigeria said, we don't want marriage. So they made their own law. So they prohibit same-sex marriage. That is what it is. But when people are fleeing persecution, we need to be mindful of the sodomy laws and also the society's behavior against LGBT persons. I mean, a 35-year-old gay man in Nigeria is unlikely to get a good job, if they are openly gay. A transgender person in Nigeria cannot get a job. So they might have good reason to leave the country. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, welcoming and sustaining people in House of Rainbow is hard work in itself. So when people come, they might not have any reason to hang around after a few months. And that's okay, because we just believe in the flow of the stream of goodness and joy that we give to the people.
And that service, that's such an important service that you provide. Thank you for that.
Indeed.
That was really insightful. But speaking about visibility, and I love that you are very public about being HIV positive and releasing stigma around that. I think it's so important for the community. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about how maybe some faith communities still contribute to HIV stigma and how we can all do better around that, and maybe some of the services you provide around that.
Thank you so much. One of the things is that I do celebrate myself, but it didn't come easy. So I'm happy to be openly gay. I call myself the happy, holy homosexual. I know people have come back to me to say, you cannot be happy, you cannot be holy, you cannot be homosexual. But I think that the reality is also living with HIV and very open about it. For me, is very important, because when I was diagnosed with HIV 2003, I didn't know of any services available, let alone is there any church or any religious leader that I can go to talk about it. Of course, my faith was impacted around my diagnosis. When I came out as gay, many people told me that you're an abomination. There are family members that kept their distance away from me. But with an HIV diagnosis, of course, those who were against my sexuality said things like, oh, this is God's punishment for your homosexuality. And to be quite honest, it took me a lot of time to recover from that level of abuse. But the reality is that I went into a period of time where I had to talk to God in my faith, in my journey. And, God literally turned the chaos around. I got confirmation from God to tell me that I am not punishing you because you're gay. This is not a punishment. HIV is a virus. And today, we know that if this virus is managed well, people can live their life. In fact, 2003, I haven't achieved much in my life. Come after 2003, I started House of Rainbow 2006. Come on now. I moved to Nigeria after my diagnosis. So something gave, and which was beautiful. I achieved a lot. In fact, post my diagnosis, I've traveled the world, and I'm not here to brag about it, but I've had opportunity to serve in many places around the world. I also discover an organization called the International Network of Religious Leaders Living with HIV. In 2009, I was at a conference in Stellenbosch, Cape Town, South Africa. When I came across the former director of this organization, Reverend Pumzile Umbazila, I was thinking, she was talking about living well with HIV. We were in a conference where we're doing a dialogue between religious leaders and the LGBT community. She gave me so many reasons to be myself. I was on a journey at that time. In 2014, I met somebody else, the Reverend J.P. Mogeti Heath, who's based in Sweden. And it was in that moment I was able to talk to him about my HIV diagnosis, and he provided one of the best pastoral care for me. And he invited me to Sweden, then he invited me to Liberia, and then I became part of this community where we now go to educate other religious leaders about HIV. The International Network of Religious Leaders Living with HIV or affected by HIV. This is a community where we educate one another. We talk about breaking down stigma, breaking down shame, breaking down denial and discrimination. And unfortunately, the traditional churches, I dare say, are not doing enough. Do you understand me? I mean, the most that they do is World AIDS Day, and that is it. But I have also been a victim of HIV stigmatization in the church. And I dare say, unfortunately, it was in the Church of England. I mean, I have nothing against this denomination right now, but it was a Church of England priest that called me out for living with HIV because I've taken part in a mass media campaign in London where my photograph was, on posters that say, I give HIV the finger. And all of a sudden, I became a subject of ridicule, of humiliation, and of course, I made a report about, I complained about it. They didn't deal with my complaint. Rather, they moved me from that parish to another parish. So it also means that, religious leaders are not doing enough to add. And I don't think that the Church of England as a denomination, there are great people in this denomination nonetheless, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to address the issue where people living with HIV within our congregation and our parishes are being demonized, are being vilified, are being stigmatized. That needs to stop. That is not something that within the gospel of Jesus Christ.
I think
Thank you.
more conversations like this help with that
Yeah,
and more dialogue and being seen and visible. So thank you again for your visibility. It's really important.
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. And Reverend Jide, I mean, you've spoken, you've covered so much already. You've told us a little bit about the history, your history. You've spoken about advocacy, action that people can take, that you've taken. And also it brings us sort of nicely into a segue. It's talking about hope. And it is LGBT History Month, as we know here in the UK, and it's Black History Month in America. So I want to ask you a question around, during LGBT History Month, where do you find hope? And what do you want people to remember from stories like yours?
I mean, where do I find hope during LGBT History Month?
Mm-hmm.
Beya Ruskin gives me hope. Beya Ruskin was a gay man
Yeah.
who is a black gay man
Mm-hmm.
and very influential in the civil rights movement. And of course, we knew about his story, but when his bio, the film about his life was done, it really put things into perspective. And that was very, very important. So in celebrating LGBT History Month, I'm looking out to people like Beya Ruskin. I'm looking out to people like Marsha P. Johnson. I'm looking out to people like Audre Lorde. And of course, people that are also alive as well. I'm looking out to people like Philo Koku. Do you understand me? I'm looking out to many other people. But I think that, we have to be honest about our history. We need to be honest about the struggles that we face. LGBT history might be in the UK, but
Mm-hmm.
LGBT history is not complete if we do not tackle racism within the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm.
Black history in America is not complete if we do not tackle the homophobia that Black people face as well. Now, I remember many years ago, I was doing a program during Black History Month where I would talk about LGBT people that have done so much, to our communities. And I was doing this program in post-16 colleges and things like that. And people were throwing bottles at me and throwing things at me saying, no, get out of here. We don't want to hear about queer people. We want to hear about Nelson Mandela and, Kwame Nkrumah and all of those greats, no doubt about it. But we also need to be able to educate our society, upwards and downwards and sideways about the impact of LGBT people in our history. So for me, there is no LGBT history without Black people, and there is no Black history without queer people. And that's the way we need to look at it. I mean, there are several events that I'm targeting this month. And of course, House of Rainbow is definitely one of those. So we started our first service on the 1st of February. We highlight the fact that it is LGBT History Month. We need to recognize the contributions of LGBT people,
Yep.
both living and those who have left a legacy with us.
Thank you, Reverend Jide.
The second part of that question, though, is would you want people to remember from stories like yours?
Thank you so much. I mean, to be quite honest, there's a lot that I want people to remember, both from myself and from LGBT history. And I want people to remember me, to be quite honest. And sometimes it can be very lonely when you think about it. I put myself in a very narrow box sometimes. Like, who is the other Black African Nigerian openly gay minister? And I think, people need to remember that, on easy lies the head that wears the crown. Do you understand me? And I think that in cases like this, we need to be able to know that, people like myself are making sacrifices for a better world. And I'm sure that a lot of activists, a lot of people that are heroes today made enormous sacrifices for us to be able to live our life today. A lot of LGBT people are able to live their life, hold hands, go to clubs, because many people made those sacrifices so that we can do that. And we need to be grateful for that. And I think that for me, that legacy of visibility is so important.
I love that. Thank you so much for all of
Thank you.
the amazing work that you do, and people absolutely should remember who you are. We will make sure that they know who you are. I'm going to do my best to raise the
Thank
roof.
you.
But to that end, I would love to know how people can support your ministry. How can people support House of Rainbow? How can we stand in solidarity with you? What's the best way to support you?
I think right now, House of Rainbow needs a lot of support. I mean, we're doing incredible work. We definitely need funding for our staffing. We need funding for our projects. And on House of Rainbow's website, which is houseofrainbow.org, we have a donation page. People can go there and make a donation. The 5 areas of House of Rainbow's work, we need collaboration. If there are any inclusive and affirming ministry out there that would like to collaborate with us on the work that we're doing either in England or in Africa, get in touch with us. Here is great opportunity to collaborate. We need support for the ministry of people living with HIV. We need support to support refugees and those that are fleeing persecution. The other caveat of that work is also we support survivors of human trafficking. When we start to talk about the human trafficking of LGBT people, people do not understand us. They didn't believe us. But people are trafficked because they were gay in order to service the gay sex industry. So you can imagine the pain that people are going through, and those survivors need support as well. I mean, the other area of support I must shout out is that in September, House of Rainbow will be 20 years. And of course, there are 2 things that we want to do. We want to go to Africa and have a program in Africa. I'm not saying country yet, but there's a program in Africa that we're targeting during the month of June to have a presence where we can talk about reconciling faith and sexuality, do a seminar about the Bible and LGBT, and also have a time for revival or prayer and praise and worship. Part of that global mission, this year is Global Black Pride in Paris. If anybody would like to partner with us, it's a great opportunity to do so. Black Pride in Paris, Global Black Pride in Paris is from the 9th to the 13th of September. If anyone is interested, we can partner to deliver an intervention there. In fact, one of the things that we're looking to do in Paris is an interfaith Eucharist or an interfaith service where people of all faith can come together and celebrate, under the umbrella of Global Black Pride. And of course, our global mission, we need to continue to develop resources as well, our print material, our video material, so that people can continue to find those resources and be able to engage with them. So if anybody's looking to partner with us, there's a lot to do. Amen to that.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jide. There's just so much that people can get involved in. So I would 100% endorse that message. Even if it's your time, look at organizations like House of Rainbow. You do amazing work, and you can't do it without the help of the community. So thank you so much. So that it's been honestly such an amazing conversation as always. You're so wise, Jide.
Thank you.
Always great to sit and listen to you talk. So we always ask our guests this question just before we end our podcast.
Okay.
Where do you find home, or what does home mean to you?
Oh, goodness me. Where do I find home? I think Africa is where I find home.
Mm.
A nice, comfortable seaside. But in this moment, I find home in the city of Manchester, the tranquility, the peace that I get here. No, I love London, so Londoners, please don't. But since moving to Manchester 4 years ago, I found relative peace and calmness, and I also take a lot of time to meditate and pray, and I'm also sharing that with other people as well, just to give them an insight of my time, with God and with my spirituality.
Mm.
So I do find peace. I would love for a longer period in Africa by the seaside, to be quite honest. But I'm trusting God.
Thank you so much.
Good. I will join you there. We'll have to.
There's a way to escape from this pain. You don't have to fall away. You don't have to learn to stay as you bow